Indiana Jones. It's a podcast about Indiana Jones. Every movie, 1 minute at a time. The Indiana Jones Minute.
Welcome back to the Indiana Jones Minute, the podcast in which we celebrate and discuss the film Raiders of the Lost Ark, 1 minute at a time. I'm Tom Taylor.
I'm Pete Mummert.
I'm Gerald Christopher Marcus Porter.
And I'm Eric Wells. I'm a PhD in Egyptology. I studied at UCLA, where I still work, and I'm happy to say that I'm the first Egyptologist on this wonderful podcast, which focuses on, of course, one of the inspirations for pretty much every Egyptologist in my generation that I know of.
That seems to be a running theme. Everybody became an archaeologist or a scientist or a historian or a nerd because of this movie.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where, you know, sadly, as I get older, I now start to see the demarcation where I'm kind of at the tail end for those of us who grew up with Indiana Jones, and now all the kids coming up they were all inspired by The Mummy.
Oh my God. For a second, I was worried you were going to say National Treasure. I think that's coming next.
Yeah, jeez.
Yeah, thank God, none of those yet.
Okay. Kids these days.
Hey, we don't let that into UCLA. I would imagine it's just like, The Mummy? Nah, that's nah.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I'm for me, you know, some academics get very dismissive. You know, they try to nitpick everything and really deride anything that's pop culture. But I mean, I love it. Like I said, this is part of the reason why you want to be an archaeologist and you want to study these things, because you see these movies. So for me, almost everything is pretty good. Even I'll probably catch flack from this, but even Gods of Egypt, I didn't hate. It was interesting seeing it in a theater all by myself. I was literally the only person there, but you know, it was over the top and gaudy, but it wasn't awful.
All right. Well, let's talk about minute 73, which begins with Dietrich questioning Belloc's clarity of thinking, and it ends with Indy wondering where Marion got her new dress.
Well, one of the most difficult things to watch in this entire scene, I'd say maybe in the entire movie, is Tote already boiling in a frying pan black suit. Now he puts on a black overcoat, and he's in the desert. And I mean, this is a man who sweats like a roasting pig on a spit when he's in the Himalayas. And then he, you know, right afterwards, he starts just laughing maniacally. And I'm like, well, he's dehydrated.
Right, he's going
clearly
loopy.
he's And I'm thinking, you know, honestly, after watching that, spoilers, but I'm surprised Toad's face is going to melt at all. I mean, it's like at this point, he's just acclimatized to the heat.
Yeah. Or he should just, you know, burst into a pile of chalk or something. He's all dehydrated.
I'm watching. It's like everybody else, you know, Belloc's kind of got his nice, white linen on and everything. And there's Tote in the back just making a point of, let me put on this trench coat.
Yeah. He's not kidding around. You kind of have to admire that. Jerry and I know a guy almost exactly like this, by the way, now that I'm thinking about it. Hello, John.
Hello, John. How you feeling?
But then Tote does that little laugh, and something I didn't mention, but it reminds me of the laugh that Marion kind of makes the same noise as the monkey when Indy first comes into the tent and finds her and he kisses her, and she does this little and Tote's laugh sounds exactly like that in the monkey.
That's funny. He's going crazy. He's turning into a monkey.
But,
I think,
go ahead.
Oh, well, yeah, I think the saddest part of this first part of the minute is, they're all up there and Belloc was yelling at Dietrich and Dietrich yells at Belloc. And like last minute, we were talking about how Belloc is in full Bond bad guy mode. He's like having fun telling Indy off. He's like, in 1,000 years, you may be worth something. And he's just totally winning and gloating and everything. But now that's all gone out of him. He's like, adieu.
Oh, yeah. Well, you know what? I thought that was a really nice touch. What Belloc says. He says, Indiana Jones. And he waves his hat lightly, and he's like, adieu.
Yeah, he gets kind of real for a second.
And you're like, and that literally means to God.
Oh.
Yeah, and he's about to lock him up, for 1,000 years in the Well of the Souls, and he's just like, he almost toasts him. To God.
Well, before he does that, he says, it was not to be, chérie. Yeah. And Indy spins around like he's talking to him.
Or like, why you? That's my girl.
For the last, 30 years or whatever it's been, I'm like, who the is Shirley? Why is he calling Marion Shirley?
They had developed pet names for each other that we didn't see.
And I literally watching it this time, minute for minute, I'm like, oh, he says Cherie. Like he's being,
Yeah. So you see behind Belloc propped up, like the Ark is there in the crate, and propped up next to it are the beautiful like wooden posts with the tassels on them. How well would those survive in the Egyptian tomb? Would those tassels make it pretty well for 3,000 years? We do see some things that survive really, really well, a lot better than you'd think. I mean, we actually do have, clothing. We have lots of textiles that I've been on digs where we've actually found basketry that's 12, 15,000 years old. Wow. So it certainly could. It wouldn't be, I think, out of the realm of possibility that you would actually see something like that. That's kind of Egypt's claim to fame, is it's so hot and it's so dry that's why we find so much stuff there. Even classicists, they study Greek, they study Latin, and people who study early Christianity, most of their source material actually comes from Egypt because it's preserved there. There's more Greek texts that are going to be found from Egypt than there are going to be from Greece, just because of the preservation that you get.
Oh, that's incredible. Yeah.
Yeah.
And this scene too, one of the things that as I was watching this to prepare that I really enjoyed is, while I don't think we were dealing with too many men with guns there, this really is a good example of kind of what early Egyptology was like. Most of the early directors of, everybody nowadays pretty much knows Zahi Hawass, even though he doesn't have the post anymore. But the head of the ministry, what's now the Ministry of Antiquities, was always a French person. They had kind of held that since Champollion first went there. But the Germans were also really important. And in fact, the first American Egyptologist, James Henry Breasted, who some people, I won't say most, actually think was maybe the inspiration for Indiana Jones, was actually trained in Berlin. So this kind of dynamic that you have here with an American, Frenchman, a German, really is something that actually was very much what was going on in Egyptology at the time, without the guns, or at least less guns.
Have you ever been on a dig or heard of, seen anything where, when they first open up the Well of the Souls and they lift it up and there's it's almost like airtight. Have you ever seen anything like that?
I've never seen that, but supposedly that's one of the things when Howard Carter opened King Tut's tomb, supposedly felt a rush of air.
Oh wow!
It's just the problem nowadays is it's so rare that you would actually find anything that was intact and sealed. So I think most people haven't really had that experience. Although with Tut's tomb, supposedly we had it. It's one of the things Now, although there's some debate over what's really there, but there's all of this discussion about whether or not there might be more chambers hidden in Tut's tomb. And one of the people looking at that was saying that's part of the reason why they're moving so slowly is, they do want to see if there's a way to kind of keep that hermetic seal, to even sample the air in there.
Oh, wow.
Because if there was
Wow.
something hidden, if there was a separate chamber, the thought is that it would be airtight, and all the microbes, the air, is going to give you a sampling of what was there,
Oh, man.
almost 3,400 years ago.
That's incredible.
Wow. Yeah.
Man. It's a good thing Indiana Jones isn't around anymore. He'd mess that up immediately. Where's my
Yeah,
bulldozer?
It's Indy is great. There's this thing that goes around every couple years on April Fools or some different days, and it's a letter from the university to Indiana Jones denying his tenure. And it just lists everything that he does wrong. And it starts off by saying, you hang out with these disreputable people. We can't find any records that you've actually published anything. You've broken numerous laws.
That's everything we've been saying for this entire show. We could have read
Yeah.
that.
Murdered at least 7 people.
Yeah.
And
Robbed
what
the cradle.
just real quick, where would an appropriate place? What would be like? Where would there be an appropriate place to house the actual Ark of the Covenant?
Other than the secret government facility with top men.
Yeah, or Marshall College, like geology building, 4th floor.
So, the situation in Egypt is a little bit different now than it was then. Now, nothing in Egypt at all is allowed to leave the country. So, even if you want to do a soil sample, if you want to do a water sample, they don't even let you take that back to your lab outside of Egypt.
Wow.
When they were doing some of the DNA studies for King Tut, National Geographic actually had to pay to build a DNA lab in Cairo because they weren't going to allow those samples to leave the country. So pretty much everything that's discovered now goes one of two ways. If it's really nice, it goes to the Cairo Museum, which unfortunately, because they have so much stuff, most of their stuff is in their basement. It's kind of even similar with the British Museum, which is, I would say, the second best collection after Cairo, where, only, 5-6% of what they have is actually on display. If it was something as nice as the Ark of the Covenant, that's something where today they would build a big display for it, put it right in the middle of the Cairo Museum. But in what's supposed to be Indy's day, you absolutely did have even archaeologists dealing with disreputable traders, buying stolen antiquities, and in some cases, even in a kind of shady way, smuggling it out of the country. So what we see happen, and this happened in the case of the bust of Nefertiti, that which is one of the best pieces of ancient art in all of the world, kind of didn't make it to that list, and all of a sudden just showed up in Berlin.
Oh my God.
Wow. That's Marcus.
Basically.
Yeah, I mean,
That's Marcus. Yeah, so that somebody got the $2,000 and went to Marrakesh.
that's exactly what they would do. So then it is the type of thing where you would absolutely see, and this could just come back either to a wealthy patron, or in the case of Indy, if he's being sponsored by the museum, it could very well go back to his university's museum collection. And you have a lot of those elite universities, University of Chicago, Harvard, Yale. They all have collections because their archaeologists were there doing excavations and would get to take stuff home with them. So I think they'd have snuck something out like that.
The good old days.
Some people miss that, unfortunately.
Yeah.
No, I mean it's also interesting too, aside from just looking at it as a if it were a nice object that didn't melt people's faces, something that was actually pretty. Any of the kind of important religious things, they take on huge significance. So,
Well, Indy seems to be we talk about this quite a bit. I mean, we said Marcus has respect for religious artifacts, as does Sala. But Indy seems to be, as we said, a little bit more cavalier, like almost agnostic about it. He's always, what are you trying to do? Scare me?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's always interested in the historical component and never really. I feel like everybody's polite. They're uprating him for not taking it seriously.
Yeah, and he could care less for almost the entire movie.
Yeah. And what you're saying before, I mean, in dealing with religious, objects, I just thought nothing comes close.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, and even though it's not really a religion that's around anymore, there's a lot of pushback that I get sometimes, through social media or even the podcast, where people think it's extremely violating that we even have archaeological digs. That what is it? Somebody said to me once something, your whole field should be ashamed of yourself. You're nothing but grave robbers, and you're desecrating these people's remains, and you should leave them alone. And
wow.
Yeah, it's interesting what people will pick on as what is a crucial kind of issue for them.
People like to be angry about stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
There maybe a few of the people who saw Raiders of the Lost Ark, said to themselves, "I will never become an archaeologist." So there's a little backlash in 1981.
A little. Okay, getting back to the minute, we got Belloc, who the more time we spend with Belloc, I'm not going to say I like him, but he is a good bad guy because you can kind of see the human being in there sometimes. Like, he seems to legitimately care that Marion, like the lid is being slowly scraped back into place, and Marion and Indy are getting into increasing darkness, and her scream gets cut off, and he seems legitimately upset. Like, not just, she was hot, I could have had a good time. He seems like, that should not have happened. This is terrible.
Well, I was just going to say, I think this is Han Solo's dream coming out again.
Uh-oh.
And I think this scene really encapsulates the whole idea that Indiana Jones is Han Solo's dream, is when that kind of they seal the Well of the Soul shut with that giant stone. It makes the exact same sound as the Han and carbonite makes when the Ugnaughts push it over and it hits the floor.
Oh my gosh.
And so when you think about this whole scene, like, this has occurred right after Indy has entered into sort of a well-like chamber, just like Han Solo did when he was sealed up in carbonite. And he enters into sort of the netherworld of fever dreams in Star Wars, and here he's literally in the Egyptian netherworld, where he's kind of fighting his way through like Ra. And then up above, his friends, in this case Sala, has that crazy lens flare that looks like a red lightsaber. And obviously Han is thinking of his friends up above being menaced by Darth Vader.
Yeah.
So all we need is for Belloc to tell him that he loves him.
Well, he came close. He said "Cherie." So.
And as you said, who is he really talking to when he says that, Cherie?
Yeah. It gets very fuzzy.
Well, although I completely agree with every word you said, Pete, I disagree with you, Tommy.
Uh-oh.
Because I think it's here that I'm like, Belloc is he's brutal. Like, he's just gonna seal up Marion for 1,000 years.
That wasn't his idea. He's not into that.
He could actually say, I don't believe that he couldn't actually be like, yo, Dietrich, get the back.
I fully believe that
honestly,
he'd had. I said last minute, I said I'm surprised they don't shove Belloc in the hole. They're kind of done with him. They got the Ark of the Covenant and they're all done. I don't think he has zero clout anymore, I think.
He says it was not to be, and then you entomb somebody for 1,000 years.
Well, he's not the hero of the movie. He's just a conflicted bad guy.
And then and Marion, she's like, she screams at him, and he just ignores it, and it's just like, it's just Wednesday. We're just gonna entomb somebody.
Well, it's like I'm surrounded by Nazis day. It's like, what's he gonna do? Love doesn't always conquer all.
You know what? I mean, even Lando Calrissian gives a little pushback to Darth Vader.
Oh, he had Lobot on his side. He could do whatever he wanted.
I mean, he gives a little bit of pushback.
A little bit. Well, I mean, so does Bell. Okay, here you go. Here's The Empire Strikes Back. Belloc is Lando. Belloc barks at the, hey, you're not supposed to do that. Lando's like, hey, I thought they were going to be left in the city under my supervision. It's all perfect. I still don't know who Lobot is, though. Where's Lobot in this scene? Is it Sala? That's probably not Sala. This movie sucks because there's no Lobot.
And they don't linger on it, but Belloc does, he does turn his back and kind of look off into the distance as they're sealing him up, Yeah. Although he certainly seems to feel some conflict.
Yeah, I agree completely.
Maybe he does. He feels
he
like
would have been such a more conflicted character.
He feels like 20 seconds of conflict. I agree.
That's a lot for a complete bastard.
He's going to be eating brie tonight.
Yeah. So would you, Jerry, in a similar situation. I like that Marion, we've had Doctor Who references on this show. I think we've had some Star Trek. We've had some Alien, some other stuff. And she finally gets in a Harry Potter reference, and it wasn't even, you know what I'm talking about, Pete? It wasn't even made yet. About. She's like, oh, this whole place is Slytherin.
Oh, Jesus.
Wow.
And Harrison Ford's reaction to that, right after that, she spins around with the torch and goes after his whip. She thinks it's a snake for a second, and his Jesus is like the most like natural, honest acting in the entire movie. There's something so great about his Jesus, like almost like that's Harrison Ford talking to Karen Allen or something. Like, ow, that actually hurt. Cut it out.
I wondered if that was just ad-libbed or just like she actually just burned him. Because it's so good. The way he says it's so good.
Yeah. He's very annoyed.
Yeah.
We need the behind the scenes commentary. She just jabbed him with a lit torch and actually burned him.
Right. The director told her to.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but is there a shade of jealousy here?
Oh, God. Yeah, Indy, once again, is not coming across very well with Marion Ravenwood and his dealings with her.
Oh.
Like, where'd you get this from him? Yeah, the guy you left me tied to his tent post, you jerk. Yeah, I got a dress out of it. I win. Hooray.
Well, I mean, what's tough
is... his whole relationship with her is conflicted.
It is. I mean, he's having a tough time, and frankly, I'm having a tough time. Like, I want to be on the side of these crazy kids, but he's making it tough. He needs to do right by Mary.
The worst thing, this isn't our minute, but early on when they're talking and she says, I was a child, you really want some clarification there. You're hoping that by child she meant, a young, 19, 20-year-old girl and really not, some.
I think, I think on our Facebook page, this may be the number one point of debate and conversation is trying to nail down exactly how old she was. And the general consensus is it's as creepily young as you don't want it to be.
Yeah. You'd hope maybe she's a grad student. Maybe. Like a fifth-year senior or something. Maybe she had an accelerated course with Abner writing her papers a little bit,
She was a graduate of middle school.
Jesus.
It was the 30s. What are you going to do? Actually, probably the 20s at the time. Anyway.
Well, one thing here, we see both Indy and Belloc forsake Marion for their work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. She cannot get a break with these jerks.
Yeah. I mean, for some reason, you kind of sort of let Indy slide a little bit because, you're like, oh, it's the Ark of the Covenant. And if I take you now, then it's gonna. You're like, but you know. And Belloc just throws down. You know, it was not to be.
Well, I'm still saying that wasn't his choice. Now, I'm not saying he would have done right by her in the long run, but right now he's pretty upset, I think.
He's a very black and white, like, okay, that's the way it is. Like, he's not, you know, he's not dithering.
Yeah, he knows what side his bread is buttered on. He's going to stick with these Nazi guys for a while and see what happens.
Well, and I mean, not to project too much onto Marion, but you know, Belloc, Indy, these men obsessed with their work at the expense of their relationship, very, very clearly, right? That's the same daddy issue she had with her father.
Yeah,
you know, reliving that.
She might be the hero of this movie. She might be like the most important.
After Barranca, she definitely is.
Yeah. I was gonna say. I mean, of course, Barranca. It goes without saying.
I just got sad again.
Oh, the minute went on too long. I got sad.
She's got the same, and she seeks the daddy issues in her men. And
I feel
now she'll have 1,000 years to work it out.
You're right. Oh my God. Now now that we feel bad, let's wrap this minute up. And we can come back tomorrow for minute 74. But before we do that, well, Eric, why don't you have your own you have a podcast, don't you?
Oh yeah, I do. I have a podcast. It's called Eric's Guide to Ancient Egypt. It's on iTunes and Stitcher, and also on my website, ericsguidetoancientegypt.com. And it's basically a history podcast where it focuses almost exclusively on ancient Egypt. And then my style is pretty much I just choose random topics that are of interest to me at the time or that are requested. So it's not a straight history. It's sometimes I read different Egyptian stories. Other times I'll go into a specific topic. So for instance, one of the ones I was just recently talking about was the birth of Egyptian archaeology, which is kind of very much related to this.
Yeah.
You know, some of the ideas of, you know, who some of the early players were, a good actually, 40, 50 years before Indiana comes onto the scene, when they're still trying to decipher hieroglyphs and figure out what these people were doing. So yeah, if you're interested in ancient Egypt, check it out.
Awesome.
And I would definitely love to second that. I'm a big fan of Eric's podcast. And if you like history or you like Egypt, you owe it to yourself to check it out. Subscribe. It's fantastic.
Oh, thank you.
And you can find us on Facebook and IndianaJonesMinute.com. And we'll have lots more Egypt coming up soon.
Awesome. And we'll have lots more Raiders of the Lost Ark coming up, at least a minute's worth tomorrow, here on the Indiana Jones Minute.
Jesus!
Jesus!
Indiana Jones, I do.